Hi, how's it going? This is Resident of College for YouTube, and I'm here to continue my read along of the Dark Shadows Daybook written by Patrick McCray, artwork by Wallace McBride. Episode 1107. When Gerard sprints the ultimate trap for Quentin, Barnabas must stop him before his best friend buries him alive. Gerard Styles, James Storm. Collinwood is going to hell. Gerard possesses Quentin, who is more than happy to dig up his own grave. Carolyn develops second sight, but is unable to give Barnabas information about where Quentin is. As Quentin nears death, Daphne falls ill and is presented with her new dress from the 1840s in the middle. Barnabas Collins has nowhere to turn for help. Just because it doesn't make immediate sense, doesn't make it bad. Containing what is easily the show's most challenging storyline, this is a sequence that's impossible to watch on autopilot. A viewer either has to zone out completely or authentically participate in interpreting the actions. Last night, I exhausted myself as I watched the episode with a friend who had never seen Dark Shadows. There's a lot to explain. That's fine, that's expected. The tough part isn't the plot, but how it involves characters who have in atypical and miracle ways. At a certain point, you simply have to write the white flag or green flag in this case. And yet, it worked as a piece of high-stakes, suspenseful drama. It held my friend's attention, and made her want to watch more, within the context of the larger show. It's a very real nightmare for Barnabas in that sense. It's a perfect creation to come from Judah's actor. The Dream Curse is an amateurish carnival ride by comparison. This isn't a literal dream, but like so much in the Ragnarok sequence, it echoes the language of dreams and the ways in which they reveal disturbing and profound truths. This is as opposed to surface level sources of fright. Wolves, skeletons, beheadings. Yes, we get it. Angelique, these things are all real scary. And in a foggy hall of doors, we kind of see it coming. Real nightmares. Don't traffic in fantasy. They don't leave you waking up saying, this is weird. They leave you waking up saying, I think that was real. It's especially clever because 1107 reveals and exploits Barnabas' greatest fears, complete responsibility for disaster, mixed with a complete inability to control or even understand the causes of it. This is clearest as he tries to understand what's upsetting Daphne, why Quentin has escaped, and what psychic truths are held by his now death-obsessed niece. Carolyn, Roger, Liz, and Stokes are nowhere to be found. As he dashes about for answers, and said, dashing only leads to more confusion. He's a man of the Enlightenment, which means that he prizes cause and effect, clear reasoning, and crisp, persuasive rhetoric to describe the universe. Here, there is no cause and effect. Gerard's reasoning is clearly strategic. But since he won't speak, there is no understanding it, much less negotiating. His communication is psychic. If you're lucky, he'll have an expression or extend a hand. But that's it. His victims change their minds, leap to conclusions, and follow orders by innately understanding them without articulation. To Barnabas, there are no clues to follow. There is no trail to chase. Merely a city on fire with nary a bucket in sight. Beyond the morbid niece, who is his only connection to Quentin, there is a one-time ghost, Daphne, who is in extreme pain because the same man, Quentin, is somewhere controlled by Gerard and vaguely possessed by his own ancestor. Quentin is beset by dread and relief as he digs his own grave. Quentin is Dark Shadow's most depressed character. Even Liz has the hope of Carolyn's love. Eternally lost, he has every reason for lonely despair, as well as every reason to be the happiest man in town. In 1107, there is a horrific relatability to his quiet, eccentric sense of release, as he skips suicide to simply dig his own grave and climb in. It is a moment of such dark truth that very few will ever want to admit themselves or others that they understand it. What sells the impossibly black mirror is Selby. You see the release of a century's worth of manufactured happiness and despair in his simple decisions, and discovers alongside his wordless new liberator, Jailer. We've heard his mournful favorite song, thought it was charming. We saw his endless romancing, thought it was dashing. We saw his drinking, thought it made him hard-edged and contemplative. And we witnessed everything else and said that that's Quentin, and left it at that. The clues were there and no one took them seriously. This is a widely irresponsible betrayal of caring for a deeply unhappy court jester, desperate for belonging and help. We should have seen it, and instead we wrote it off. The horror in this scene is as much at ourselves for ignoring the obvious as it is at Quentin. Imagine what Barnabas must be thinking as his savior and surrogate custodian, not stopping that fate and not knowing there was anything to be stopped. That's a nightmare. That's a dream curse. That's what Gerard does. Episode 1108. When Maggie's life hangs in the balance, Barnabas must be forced to make the ultimate sacrifice to find the missing Quentin. Maggie Evans, Catherine Lee Scott. As Maggie's condition worsens, Sebastian insists on relocating her. He agrees to use his powers to locate Quentin if Barnabas will release her. Finding little conclusive, Sebastian is still allowed to take a shaken and weighing Maggie to Windcliff. Barnabas and Julia receive portents that the destruction of Collinwood will happen that night, and discover an important clue when a heartbeat rings out from Quentin's aging portrait. 1108 falls at a very awkward time for Dark Shadows, and it explains the formula of plot events within. First, it was broadcast on a Thursday. Fridays are often set aside for big plot events, and so many Thursdays have had a tough set of jobs. They have to tell the story, but not too much. They save Friday for the big cliffhangers by holding back, but they have to tease enough to make you want to get to the big cliffhanger. And the next episode, 1109, is perhaps the most dramatic and profound cliffhanger the series ever had, as zombies invade and destroy Collinwood. The children are seemingly murdered. Barnabas is last seen being nearly torn apart by the living dead, and Julia, yes, Julia, is our last hope, thrust 130 years into the past. Top that, Secret Storm. But we're not there yet, and 1108 has one of the most important plot events to cover and not cover, to justify the commemorate but not necessarily condone. We say goodbye to Maggie Evans and founding ensemble giant Catherine Lee Scott, holding out hope that the show would continue for many years, and that she would return from Europe eager to rejoin the cast. The character's life was spared. Come on, this is Maggie Evans, not Megan Todd. And yes, she is important to the plot. After all, she proves the potency of Roxanne Drew's powers of vampirism, draining Maggie's life away just as she drains the character's importance as a love interest away, infusing it in herself. There is an irony to that, but they didn't really have the time to dress it up. The conclusion of Roxanne is one of the most underdeveloped aspects of this story, and Maggie's sacrifice for it feels equally like a non-sequitur on the surface. What the story gains as an exercise in stakes. This arc takes no prisoners. If you want to show the strength of your villain, have him take out some of the most resilient characters early on. It hurts, but it reminds us that there are real consequences to their attacks. This isn't a sitcom with a reset button at the end of every episode. Maggie is human, and humans have limits. Quentin was a vaguely and gentleman. Roxanne, she has no such prejudice of courtly restraint, and in that way her very feminine attack on that what Barnabas values most is the kind of dirty pull we associate with women preemptively scorned. It's a good thing Nicholas Blair isn't around. I can barely fathom the reckoning. Miss Scott's exit is one of the show's most mournful moments, and its quick and dirty near senselessness mirrors the gruesome routine that Vietnam casualty reports had on the nightly news. But what were they to do to make her exit a major plot element? Would have required either killing Maggie, and that was out of the question, if a return were ever hoped for, or some kind of kidnapping, which would never be resolved unless a return were granted. Without those options, shuffling her off to Wycliffe was one of the only resorts. The curt exit and scant sentimentality of the episode feel vaguely passive-aggressive. This is not the kind of clip show retrospective to which prime time would have treated us. But that's not uncommon for soaps, especially one embroiled at the turning point of its darkest and most far-reaching storyline. And reportedly, it was an inside joke by Dan Curtis, who said she was crazy for leaving the show. As Fraud said, there's no such thing as a joke. And what exactly was she to do? After 5 years of alternating between victim and voice of reasoning, the options were growing slim. The movie was done, its structure pretty much guaranteeing that no franchise was in the offing to let her reprise the role. Parallel Time was a shrill exercise in victimhood, where her character was forced into the appearance of whiny neediness and again serving as the subject for a kidnapping. The only real plot advancement available would have been if Maggie had embraced the memory of Josette and became willingly romantic with Barnabas. It's an interesting alternate path for the franchise, and without it, almost every other permutation had been exhausted. Once she leaves, and reasons quite rightly that she'll never see the people again, the other characters miss no beats moving on. It is a case of Maggie who, or is that the current crisis? Threatened children and an entombed Quentin are so severe that there's no time for sentiment. Both, and the lesson of very real casualties, heightened stakes of the apocalyptic episode to come. The oncoming weekend was destined to be a long one for Dark Shadows and the fans. Episode 1109. Can Barnabas and Quentin stop Gerard Stiles from raising an army of the dead to destroy Collinwood? Zombie Chuck Morgan. Julia and Barnabas rescue Quentin from being buried alive as Gerard prepares David and Haley for their own ritual murder. After Quentin is driven mad by his attempt to thwart the evil specter, Barnabas is assaulted by the living dead, and Julia finds herself alone in the enchanted staircase bound for 1840. Full disclosure, I've written about this one before, but in a long chain of most important Dark Shadows episodes, this thrusts itself to the head of the line and tells the others to just back off. And given what goes on in 1109, I wouldn't want to throw down with it. As episodes go, I'm not going on the record to say it's that well written. It has a sweaty desperation to it on every level. And you could tell that the writers were pushing to create an event where one may not really exist. This sequence of the show is important, yes, but I'm not sure if it's actually important or if I'm responding to a sense of obligation to find it so. I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer, completely enamored. I don't understand most movies. I can't tell you how many times I've seen The Living Daylights, and I haven't a clue what's going on. I think the Taliban are the heroes in it. No, I'm not kidding. If my brow were any lower, it would be lovingly described by the ghost of Jacques Cousteau. So the only reason I usually claim to like good things is to keep the tasteful from being brandishing rolled up copies of Cassius du Cinema and taking my lunch money. I'd rather be watching Smokey and the Bandit Part 3. Is that what's happening in 1109? I could couch it in claims that is impenetrably is all part of Gerard's existential plan to drive them mad. I've done that before, but is that honest, or does it just sound good? Still, I love it. Maybe that's enough. Yes, it does have mysteries that never pay off. Like Gerard's plan, there's a whole thing about Quentin being forced to relate the death of his twin uncle's son, and then re-die, being buried. No, almost skipped the page. Buried alive, like he was in. Wait, did any of that happen in 1840? I don't think so. I don't remember. I guess the heroes changed the timeline. Sure, why not? It doesn't really bother me that much, to be honest. The cast, especially Combat, paid David Selby, who probably needed to take a nap for a month after this, really, really pulls it off. If you want what passes for a spectacle on a budget, that never exceeded the average daytime soap. Your front row seat is waiting. I enjoy its baffling quality. It feels like a Robert Altman movie. I'm getting little slices of life connected to unexplained offstage action with a significance that's never really revealed. So where's Paul Dooley? The obsession with reincarnation and twins runs throughout the episode. It's deeply theatrical that way, as if the actors can't quite shake parts they've never really played. Is Daphne a ghost or not? Is she on Gerard's team or not? I don't know. But I don't understand most people, and watching Daphne ping pong between agendas and loyalties is what I experience every day. One of the creepiest elements is Gerard's obsession with kids. Clothing. I guess he went to Brewster's in between episodes and got them some fancy new duds. Because he's widely insistent that children of the 1970s, possessed by children from the 1840s, have new clothes. You'd think he'd want them dressed in antique assemblies to relive that night he'll never kill them. But these are right off the rack. It's a sick moment on several levels beyond the mustard yellow shirt he forces David Hensey to don. It's only now that I've begun to wonder if he's forcing them into the clothes they'll have on at the visitation after he kills them. It's a level of xenophilic mockery to reveal that of the most brutal serial killer. The other darkly kinky aspect is that this is David and Haley will be undressing in the same room. Aroused as they face certain death, the show pulls a musical to deny that these kids are deep in the mournful summer heat of puberty. But when it does things like this, it's sex and death and taboo that passes us by, because zombies are on the march. So run home at 4:30 to catch it, kiddos. Yeah, we're playing for keeps, and it makes me wonder what kids made of it. It was probably deeply cathartic to watch adults who were talking about things that only pretended to understand get hoisted by their own green flag. Finally, one TV show actually gets what it's like to be a child, or me. This episode is The Empire Strikes Back of Dark Shadows, with our heroes in constant retreat. But it has the undeniable grip of great drama, with our honestly beloved heroes pushed to brinks of terror, beyond their reckoning to hell, with Willie emerging from a coma and spilling the beans to Dana Elker. Barnabas, what you faced in 1967 was Tinker Toys compared to being grappled by zombies. Chuck Morgan threw off the fabric that was thrown over his head and chased you like you had the last two for one Malibu Chicken Salazar coupons on Earth. There's a dark satisfaction to seeing our heroes really put to the test. The crashing conundrum of Quentin's intentional smugness of 1897 is not when he learns his unknown son is dead. That humiliating around is a trip to Epcot compared to Gerard's simple maddening grip. Gerard is the error and ick of ghosts that Quentin would have feared as a child, and he cannot be outrun. Just as the teens are infantilized, so is Quentin, before being slammed back into adulthood to stagger away from another boy he couldn't save. This is his fate, to be the loveless, misunderstood lone wolf Collins. He's destined to live for the sole purpose of officiating at funerals for children he never saved, the only ones naively wise enough to have loved him. Pathers, yes, and a baseline to return from. We've always known that our heroes could get the best of Nicholas Blair and Petofi because guys like those don't really play for keeps. They're having too much fun, but Gerard is Lex Luthor, the real one, the one who doesn't get his kicks from playing the deaths of innocent people, but causing them. And Barnabas is not innocent, nor is Julia, nor is Quentin, nor even David. If you go back far enough, remember when they were bad guys, and we hoped they'd get what was coming to them. Be careful what you wish for, because Gerard is that hero that once upon a time we were hoping would put them in their place. All motion is relative. Mr. Brady, all motion is relative. It's an evil statement. It's a statement that the universe doesn't care about all the swell stuff you've done for hundreds of episodes, because it has a moral agenda to fill. And that alone is a force for our heroes to fight. For all of us, because who they've become matters. The good that they've done matters. Now, in 1840, they'll finally have a chance to prove it. Except for Quentin the second. He'll just have to wait for a new timeline to put in at the Collinsport Depot and take him to the beginning and the end of a better world. He deserves it, as do the rest. Thanks to the destruction of everything, they just might get it. And I like 1109 a lot. But I like documentaries. So. 1840. Last best hope. Julia and Barnabas escaped the destruction of Collinwood to confront the Collins family's greatest enemy. Episode 1117. As Desmond Collins becomes home to President Collins with a glass box housing the most curious head in all of occult lore, can Barnabas stop himself from turning Roxanne into one of the living dead? Desmond, John Carlin. In the old house, Julia holds the 1840-era Barnabas at bay with a cross as he hovers over Roxanne, about to transform her. Suddenly, his demeanor shifts, and he asks her to drop the crucifix. How, 1970-era Barnabas has finally transferred his soul back to the 1840s and is in control. Eager to investigate matters at Collinwood, Barnabas leaves Julia with Roxanne, with instructions to wipe her memory of him. Unfortunately, Roxanne escapes. Meanwhile, Flora's son, Desmond, returns from aboard with a strange gift for Quentin. A preserved, disembodied head in a glass. Flora is repulsed, but her concern for that evaporates when she meets Barnabas. Julia arrives and reports to Barnabas that Roxanne is missing. Conveniently, Roxanne staggers in and begins to accuse Barnabas of something terrible when she passes out. Julia goes upstairs to tend to her and continue her hypnosis. As they wait, Desmond displays great doubt for Barnabas. Julia comes back downstairs with doubts about her success. Samantha reports that Roxanne is awake and that her memory ends before meeting Barnabas. Elsewhere at Rose Cottage, Desmond doubts the truth behind Barnabas's cover story. Flora is more concerned with the evil she senses from that head. Desmond assures her that all is well, but as they leave, the head's eyes snap open and burn with iniquity. Let's get this down. We have a noble woman ready to become a vampire slave until the vampire is possessed by his time-traveling soul from the future, thus saving her. The future vampire then teams up with another seasoned time traveler to successfully mix an old con with hypnosis to insinuate him back into the family and cover his earlier self's most impetuous tracks. Meanwhile, a disembodied head, that's right, in a glass box is all too alive and clearly bent on some kind of evil. Did you get all of that? If you have not hooked, if you're not hooked by the episode, if you're not propelled to the next installment as if shot out of a cannon, if you think this is anything but Dark Shadows at its most exciting, go back to Grey's Anatomy. We are way, way beyond the days of Josette. Nothing was wrong with that in its way. That is essential to creating this arc as anything else. But this is the last spurt of growth. We'll see which goes beyond that. It's one thing to see Barnabas evolve through growing and suffering. But what does that evolved man do? He grew, got knocked down by the Leviathans, Parallel Time, and Ragnarok, and now has a mature mix of worldliness, confidence, and total humility. In other words, he's in the perfect spot to make the risk choices and learn the impossible lessons always lurking in the final act. I'm not sure we've been allowed to have this much unallowed fun since the wild days of Count Patofa. And is that Angelique's laughter I hear from a few episodes away? We also say hello to my favorite evolution of John Carlin's character, Desmond. If you look at all of the characters each actor plays as metaphorical sides of the same figure, Desmond is both as far from Willie as possible and as representative of all of that's best. His inadequate, bold, observant, principled, and loyal. He's. And did I just lose my place? He's in. Okay. You know all. I did lose my place there for a second. All the things that the series forces Willie to summon from within. And let's also say hello to Michael Mcguire as the biggest bad the series would ever know. Judah Zachary. It's a strange role, but when you see him acting as at Miranda's trial, we know why he was. Okay, real quick, Miranda is Angelique. Cat, why he was cast. He went on to have a richly varied TV career, including appearances in both Dan Curtis' Walkie War miniseries. He was no stranger to the stage either, including an appearance in the prestigious Osage County in the Broadway run, no less. On this day in 1970, it became legal for President Nixon to sell weapons to Israel, and just in time for the holidays. Also, the world said goodbye to Edward Everett Horton, character actor and the voice of Fractured Fairy Tales. I best know him for his sensitive and natured portrayal of the Native American when he essayed the role of Chief Screaming Chicken on ABC's Batman. Horton was one of those gradedly prissy actors, screamingly gay in a time when that was what fine in a marginalized way. Very much of the Ernest Theisker school of Bulgarian actors, he would have fit right in on Dark Shadows. I suspect, and yes, that's a compliment, front-handed thank you, my favorite Horton part. Go check him out in Busby Berkeley's most surreal film ever, The Gang's All Here. You'll never poo-poo Paddock again. Episode 1125. When Gabriel and Desmond team up to find hidden treasure, will a darker destiny find them first? Desmond John Carlin. Desmond ponders Otis Green's final words as the head of Judah Zachary moves him to find even more artifacts under Collinsport. Thanks to Gabriel, who's been managing the August of Collinwood's jittery residence, he locates a hidden vault in a graveyard within, a coffin trapped under a giant cross from a secret panel. Desmond finds a golden mask encrusted with gems. 1840 is a storyline best with ambiguity. It's one of the show's darkest, most occult entries and also the real culmination of the series. Why it should also have so many unwatchable elements is flummoxing. I think it's due to the long struggle the sequence has to connect us to the characters. 1795 can be seen through Vicky's eyes, if need be, but if not, we already know Barnabas and kinda sorta know Joseph. The central mystery on how Barnabas became a vampire has been talked about and pondered for nearly a year. Everything revolves around that, or the agent of that change. Angelique, 1897, strives to take greater autonomy, but the puzzle of Quentin Collins is at least about a Collins. We follow Barnabas as he is introduced to the family on their clear mission to save David, and the initial foray into telling the story apart from him is about one central point of suspense, the matter of the will. It also has some of Barnabas' fingerprints involved, since he's the family secret that may be divulged as part of the inheritance. 1840 is a largely independent story that moves without Barnabas or even Julia. Without those surrogates, it's easy to lose us. Quentin isn't Quentin, and we don't see that much of him in the beginning. Who is Desmond? Who cares? He's got a head, and he's ranting at Letitia, who is sort of pansy, but not pansy in any way. Finally, we meet Gerard, and he's not even entirely Gerard. He's some guy named Ivan Miller, who's loathing at Collinwood. Why? To take it over from characters we don't know nor care about. He's a frenemy of strangers, and then he gets around to real evil. He's not even Gerard, he's possessed by the head. Wait, okay, he's Ivan Miller, claiming to be Gerard Stiles, who's actually the puppet of a disembodied silent head of a man from Bedford named Judah Zachary. The guy who influenced Angelique back when she was, what? Who is Miranda Duvall? Did I miss a staff meeting? Is Nicholas Blair involved with this? Was this an email attachment? Because I never read this. That's funny. Well, when you put it that way, it reminds me of why I like it. Do you see my dilemma? Fascinating, and yet strangely not. This is an episode like Then in an episode like this, you get lots of arguing about Samantha. And I only care about that because the story tells me to. Will anyone here who gives a rat's patoot about Samantha Collins raise their hand? What, not a single hand? Didn't you people hit the Mitchum after you showered? No one? Yeah, no wonder Virginia Vestoff left Collinwood to marry John Adams. In 1966, Victoria gets dropped into a story that's even well underway for 20 years or so. Why do we care? Because Vicky is stuck there. Her past is a blank, but she and we know that her only real new home is the one in trouble. Whatever affects these people will affect her because it will affect David, and it's her job. Oh, and where else is she going to go? Vicky is firmly planted in the eye of that storm. We are all new to Collinwood, and by stranding her in the midst of it all, we explore those pertinent mysteries together. 1840 has no Vicky Winters, and Barnabas is too tangly to the storyline. So is Julia. 1840's challenge is not that it's too far, slow, nor fast, nor complicated, nor too simple. It's just that it's too distant from why we really care. Thank goodness that a severed head is involved. The occult aspects remain compelling, and their ecstasy is of a grotesque and size that we have to lean more of only to see what it does. An episode involving a severed head leading a man to his cemetery's hidden vault containing a casket pinned shut by a giant cross can't be all bad. And that it has a secret compartment containing a jeweled mask. Thank you, Dan. Those are the cherries in the fruit cocktail that we were fishing for. What else kept us afloat? We may not care what James Storm and Chris Peanock are talking about, but I'd watch them read at Denny's menu. Yeah, they were great together, and find it compelling. As much as anything, the pleasure they take in their acting is a delight, and that kind of dramatic sportsmanship may be the real secret to Dark Shadows after all. Episode 1160. Daniel learns that staggering truths about Gabriel Collins. But is he prepared to pay the ultimate price? Gabriel Christopher Peanock. Gabriel rises from his wheelchair to stop Daniel from altering the will. He has been able to walk for years, but find disability to give his father a reason to love and care for him. Daniel dies, and Gabriel begins to plot the new age of Collinwood. Edith swears satanic allegiance to Gerard, and afterward she and Gerard witness the impromptu reading of Daniel's will. Desmond is shocked, speechless, by what he sees in it, sir. This is one of those episodes that, when we begin the Daybook, I savored writing about. When the day came last year, I was terribly ill and I couldn't will, honey, I'm home. We talk a lot about Gordon Russell here at Daybook Command, Sam Hall, his dark twin, and Live in Love and Mad of a writing partner is tougher to capture. Russell is no coward. He's the bubbles in champagne, witty, deft with wordplay and pungent. On the other hand, Sam is known for his edgy angst gravities that sells him a tad short through. On this episode is prime Sam Hall. The white-hot core of it is the monologue that Gabriel gives to Daniel as the patriarch in his death throes. It's the reason I wanted to write about this episode, and it provides the opportunity for Chris Peanock to have what may be his finest moment on the series. It's a monologue full of pettiness, weakness, and vulnerable jealousy. At the same time, it is a cry for love, and it cannot be heard all the way over in Logansport. And can be heard all the way in Logansport, I'm sorry. The audacity of the piece is singular. With Peanock, the energetic, insightful risk-taker of the cast, it becomes perhaps one of the most unforgettable human moments in all of 450 hours of programming that makes Dark Shadows. Is there more to say? Always, but it is so important that he deserves to stand on his own. Happy Thanksgiving. Episode 1167. When the new master of Collinwood learns of the darkest legacy Can he turn it to the advantage before it consumes him? Jeremy Grimes, Tom Haper. Lamar and Gerard dedicate themselves to proving that a vampire is loose at Collinwood. Even if it means exposing the truth about Roxanne, Flora Collins helps them with a family history trying in the 1797 vampire attacks with the disappearance of Lamar's father. While investigating the old house, Lamar and Gerard find recriminating letters related to Reverend Trask's death. Meanwhile, the dashing young son of Mordecai Grimes begins to court Carrie Stokes. I'm not entirely certain when Dan Curtis got the news that the show was in trouble at this point. We are about 6 months away from the show leaving the air. I don't think the writing was on the wall. However, fate might have been shaking its spray paint in anticipation, standing by the bricks, whistling innocently. It's fun to speculate what Curtis and company were thinking and planning for the future anyway. Having plundered the applicable classics, I'm sure it was clear that they needed new sources of inspiration. And while that might have been an uncertain prospect, there is a sense of confidence that the series would continue. I see that when I look at Kate Jackson, Kathy Cody, and Tom Haper. Haper only appears in 4 episodes, but he's the tall, dark Curtis type. And when I see him on screen with Cody, I get the sense that the next generation, Carolyn and Joe, are being conjured. We already have Victoria Winters 3.0 and Kate Jackson as the show's OG Joan Bennett. As far as the show's OG Joan Bennett, yet another afternoon with Flora Collins, the most bizarre character she ever got to play. Flora is at her best in this. Certainly she gets deadly serious when she discusses the strange history of the 1790s. But before that, her flightlessness is questionably creepy. There is a strange baby doll quality for her performance. That was weird touchness of Norman Desmond. As ingenuine in some parts, it's the most decadent character on the show since Pansy Faye. And the only thing missing is one of the top Southern accents to complete it. This is by no means a criticism. If anything, I celebrate the lack of a Southern accent. It feels like it has been a long time since the needle on the continuity has gone to the red. But 1167 sends it spinning. Why they kept referring to 1795 as 1797 is beyond me. I can understand weariness and confusion from a overtaxed written staff, but didn't anyone else notice? I have a theory on that, by the way. My desire to rationalize anything, I just take it as poor research on the part of the characters. It's not like they had Bing. On this day in 1970, Germany and Poland decided to get along much better, and good for them. Episode 1172. As Barnabas faces his ultimate reckoning, can Juliet risk an alliance with Gerard, Lamar, Trask, Jerry Lacey? Trask walls his father's murder up in the basement of the old house in a grand gesture of revenge. Julia smells foul play, and Quentin faces a trial without a key witness. Meanwhile, in trying to contact Joanna, Daphne finds herself in a trap. It occurred to me that he could have just slugged Trask, but he didn't. I keep waiting for an episode to come along where I can depict Barnabas with Falstaffian grandeur and call him the great man. who's come along sometimes, but he's usually just a man. Yes, sometimes the man, but just as frequently a man, with or without fangs. And there within lies what makes him so rich and compelling and flammable as a protagonist. A matinee idol like Quentin would have wrestled Trask for his gun when faced with the alternative of locking himself in shackles for the last taste of amiable. Barnabas realizes that he has a better than event realizes that he has a better than average chance at getting shot and dying very painfully on the spot. Does he imagine that Julie and Angelique will come to his rescue? I'd like to think so, but I'm more than likely he is just out of plans. Not that he was ever much of a planner, only in times such as 1897 when facing off with Flora does he really emerge as a chess master of note. For the most part, Barnabas, like all of others, is a lucky improviser, sometimes aided by his unique and inconsistent application of honor, often bested by it. At least he appreciates the irony of becoming definitively mortal, just in time to die from it. Chances are Barnabas is a coward, and so what? Like Graves, Claudius, it's kept him alive. Yes, he shows bravery many times, usually out of immediate necessity, sometimes out of love, maybe even the right thing, but out of the literature's heroic protagonist, Barnabas consistently finds himself over his head and struggling to get by, for all of Quentin's propensity for scraping. Where does it get him? Aristide, Jeb, and even the occasional werewolf may be slowed down a tad by his right hook, but just slowed down. Had he dramatized like any self-respecting Collins, the most it would have cost him is a little pride. For all of his moments of impudence, Barnabas has far more episodes of being bullied at the core of his mantle of apparent strength. Bless him for it. I think this is the real secret of his appeal. It's not Captain Kirk, even 1 hour out of the week that would be exhausting, who can keep that going. He's more like a version that Q might show Picard of how he'll wind up if he doesn't take a knife to the chest as a teachable moment. But Barnabas appears in and around 188 hours of Dark Shadows. Kirk, about 69 of his show. At least Barnabas 119 more hours than Kirk to dodge stakes, bullets, and hex-hurling wives. And he could really use a Spock because Willie isn't cutting it. And Stokes has papers to grade. I like that. He has a McCoy, but only after she stops trying to blackmail and poison him, Julia, for months and months. The guy is often on his own. I don't know about you, but it has a familiar ring for much of life. Not all, but much. Sports and Lord of the Rings are for people with friends. Dark Shadows for the rest of us. And good for it. Sometimes the friend string goes dry because of bad choices. Sometimes just bad luck. Sometimes, as with the Julias in life, we push them away because of insistent goldvixisms, or because we think we don't deserve them. And sometimes we're just, vampires. This show is a bountiful compassion. Yes, 450 hours of it, but it has, at its core, the program is the most dreadful of art forms. The teaching tool, and it exhorts us to preserve. Yes, Barnabas is often a stiff-necked coward and the most imperfect of heroes, but he endures. His plans often are incredible. Son, ill-conceived and born from compromise. He has them. He tries to regain Josette. He goes to 1897. He returns to parallel time to save Maggie. He barely knows. These are his friends, or the closest things he'll conceive. He may be a coward, but you'll have to chase him the extra mile to call him that, because the extra mile is where he begins. Most heroes will never really be Barnabas. He's who we are. Despite it all, he holds fast to survival, and if he can, so can we. Even if we never meet, we are more than his most loyal friend, and in many ways, he is ours. Okay, guys, that's where I'm going to stop for now. When I come back, episode 1187. I'll be back later today. Before I go, my theory on why they mentioned 1797 and not 1795, I interpret that a little differently. I don't think they're necessarily messing up. I think and again, this is my opinion. This is how I interpret it when I hear that, when you go back through Dark Shadows. I meant that because, again, Joshua, when they're talking about Joshua, they're going through the family history. I think, honestly, the overall records would have been found. So the overall records, the attacks weren't going on in 1797. So maybe they just, it wasn't going on in I don't know why exactly the mess up. So I think, in my opinion, the records itself insist that, what was I trying to say? God, I don't even know. My mind's like a blank now, but I'm trying to think what I was trying to say. Oh my goodness. Okay, so 1795, we know the attacks happened because of Barnabas. Well, maybe in this, somehow Joshua altered the year. I don't think it's again, it is a mess up, sure, but I'm improving. God help me. Oh, shit. God help me. I'm sorry. Guys, go pick this up. Written by Patrick McCray, The Dark Shadows Daybook. Artwork by Wallace McBride. I'm insane. I'm crazy, guys. What can I say? Please disagree with me about the 1790 thing. It's crazy, right? I think they could have altered the records. I mean, because Barnabas goes back in 1796. So maybe that has something to do with it too, where they mentioned 1797 in some weird way. I don't know. It could have. You never know. Maybe an attack had occurred and it wasn't Barnabas. You never know. So there you go. Guys, link is going to be in the description box. I'm going to be back sometime later today to read more. I'm sorry. I'm just having fun. You guys have a great day. I'll see you later.